David?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Chair. This is to seek members' agreement to commission a feasibility study to demonstrate the future potential uses of the Rhosddu Road site, to include vacant land at the site of the former Centre 67. It also includes, obviously, currently Green Acres, Cunliffe Centre and the Springfield sheltered accommodation. Members will see the attached plan at the back of the report, but the Executive Board decision is to, if approved today, is the commissioning of a feasibility study to explore and make recommendations on the future use of the Rhosddu Road site with consideration for social housing. Just to make members aware, obviously we have a budget implication on 5.2, and the officers and myself have been working to identify future funding for 9 million over the next 3 years, 1 million for this year, and a subsequent 4 million for the following 2 years to support this project. Therefore, Chair, I'm happy to move the recommendations in the report.
Thank you, David. Councillor John Pritchard.
Good morning. This is good news for the Wrexham area and will definitely go some way to solving our large waiting lists for council properties. Please to second the report, Dirk. Thank you.
Thank you. Executive Board members. Anybody at all? Okay. Councillor Dana Davis.
Thank you, Chair.
Good morning.
Well, good evening. Yeah, I have no issues with the recommendations for this report. It's the time frame. And as Councillor Pritchard said, this is aimed to reduce our waiting list, but it's 3 years away. And I'm just wondering what work's been done to include other council land in that feasibility study that we can work on quite quickly. And the fact that we've got probably more now than 4,500 on the waiting list, what work has been done on that waiting list to split out the transfers from those that actually are families that are homeless? I understand the work that's already been done through the COVID period. We're not talking about street homeless in Wrexham anymore. We're talking about no-fault eviction notices that are, putting the pressure on the waiting list. And those families are in demand for properties, and we haven't got the social housing to meet that demand. So it's something that we need to do fairly quickly. And we've obviously got council land within the county, and this is just looking at one piece of land. And if we're going through a feasibility process, then wouldn't it be prudent for the council to include other land in there so that we can get moving on social housing pretty quickly and not be looking at something that's 3 years off? Because where will our waiting list be then? Diolch.
Thank you, Councillor Dana Davis. Can I just make a comment from my position as Chair and Lead Member of Finance, and then I'll bring in David and the officer to do so. I just like to say things sometimes as I see it. I take on board what you've said, but I will remind you that the Welsh Government has a policy in building so many affordable homes and social housing across this country. If the Welsh Government, and I'll say Westminster because I like to be fair here, allocate us money, we'll spend it. We work tirelessly within this authority to identify land, and we haven't got a great deal left now because we've sold most of it to invest into 21st century schools, as you know. So if the Welsh Government want to announce a national fund that we can bid into, I would be very grateful. And I think that's important because you sit here this morning in front of us asking us to move forward and as quickly as possible, and I take that on board. But this affordable housing and homelessness is bigger than us. It's across Wales, 22 authorities, and it's across the United Kingdom. And I felt that I had to say that here this morning. Councillor David Grithell, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just in response to Councillor Davis's question. I think it's a valid question about what we're doing as a council. A couple of things really, just to start the response off. There is a report going to the Homes and Environment Scrutiny Committee in a couple of weeks, which sets out a review of our allocations policy following a topic request. What we have done in the call over, which we had call over last week, and I don't want to say too much because that report hasn't been published yet, but as the question's been asked, there is a document attached to that report which gives information about what we're doing as a housing department in addressing some of the issues to do with homeless, to do with what we're doing with spending our money when we're buying back properties. I'll give you an example. So we got, in the allocations, we have bands 1 to 4. So the reality is, bands 1 to 3, there's about 2,500 people on the waiting list. In band 4, there's another 2,000 people. So our waiting list for priority need is approximately 2,500 people, not 4,000. But we do, on the waiting list, we do allocate people, they can apply for band 4. So to put it in perspective, for people on priority need, we've probably got about 2,500 people in Wrexham. And I know the figure of 4,000, 4,500 being branded around, but there's lots of people on that waiting list that are not priority need. So I just put that into some perspective. The other thing that we're doing is we're working with Welsh Government, and we have appointed an accommodations officer, part of the Welsh Government work that we've been doing with the housing group on the Welsh Government, and that is going to look at everything across Wales and in Wrexham about what we can do to bring properties back into use, whether we buy the properties. Clearly, what I would say is that we are hindered at the moment because of the phosphorus issue. So there is plans being set up, and you'll see from that report when we go to scrutiny that we are looking at developing a strategy about what we can do in the next 2 to 3 years to assist our tenants and reduce the waiting list further down. But this is the start of that process. So Rhosddu road site is the start of the process. We have got money allocated for this site, subject to the commissioning of a feasibility study to make sure that we can get as many units on there as possible to reduce our waiting list. So this is the start of the journey, I think, Dana, but it's also to put into perspective that there's lots of work going around in the background, and no doubt that will be at the forefront when it comes to the scrutiny committee.
You can come back with a supplementary, Councillor Davis.
Thank you. Yeah, I understand the issue with funding, but we've talked about this in Wrexham previously because obviously it was all linked to the debt cap and the HRA, and we were looking for a gap in the debt cap and that so that we could look to move towards social housing, because that's how Flint did their redevelopment of their social housing. So it's not all about, waiting on Welsh Government. There's other ways of looking at that, and that's why I posed the question. I understand, and I thank Councillor Bethel for his response. I think within that as Councillor Bethel's pointed out, within that 4,500 on the waiting list, there might be an opportunity here to review that waiting list because we've got transfers there with over and under occupancy in that figure. And obviously, they are the movement of people to the right size accommodation, aren't they? They are not people on the waiting list that have not got a roof over their head. So I think, there's two ways now of dealing with that waiting list, isn't there? And that priority need, we need to get to that figure, and we need to see what we can do, because in 3 years' time, that priority need is going to increase because the private sector rental market is collapsing, isn't it? Councillor Pritchard talked about affordability. Affordability isn't affordable anymore. So the only option now is social housing, isn't it? We have to build up that rental market at, that is affordable for renters, because not everybody wants to purchase a property. You know, a number of people just want to rent their home going forward, but they want a home. And we've got people now that are stuck in temporary accommodation that is unsuitable and that is far away from their local area. It's far away from the kids' schools and it's far away from their job as well. So it's putting huge amounts of pressure on those families and their mental health as well in coping with this situation. So there is a priority for us to get shifting on this. On page 215, it says that a consultant will be commissioned to the writing of the master plan. Do we have any timescale on that? When are we expecting this report to come back with some vision of a master plan? So what timescales have we put on that feasibility report coming back into this council? And when do you expect the next report on progress to come before this executive board? Diolch yn fawr.
David?
Yeah, in terms of timescale, subject to approval today, we're expecting the feasibility study to come back by the end of summer, and then obviously dependent on the feasibility study, we'll bring a further report back in the autumn to the executive board on the outcome of that and the next steps. But can I just reiterate as well, when you say about funding, just to make sure that we're crystal clear, we have identified, Wrexham Council have identified £9 million over the next 3 years. This is not Welsh Government funding, this is our funding, this is Council HRA funding, rental income in our business plan to support the building of new council housing on the Rhosddu site. So the reality is that's our commitment that we're trying to do, and subject to all the necessary checks and the commissioning of a study, that is our aspiration, to build more council housing to reduce our waiting list.
Thank you. Could I just make a comment, because I think it's important to do so this time. I hear what Councillor Dana Davis says, and I agree with some of the things he said, but I think we need to look at this in the bigger picture here. The Welsh Government has announced this country as a country of sanctuary, and I haven't a problem with that. Take that on board. But with that announcement comes pressure to all local authorities across Wales. I believe we lead the way in Wales in some areas, especially with the refugees, the Syrians, etc. And it goes on settlement area. We've done fantastic, but that brings pressure here. And I understand with regards to funding, but Dana, we put a bid into the Welsh Government to purchase a facility in Wrexham, and we were turned down by the Welsh Government. And David has said that we're spending our own money. We purchased a facility here in Wrexham through the HRA because the Welsh Government didn't give us the money. But can I just throw this, because we are drifting a bit, but you've come to the table, and I think if we're going to have the conversation, let's have a balanced conversation here. What about our local Indigenous people, the people who we represent, who live in our wards, who are waiting for a long time on the housing list to be allocated? There's pressure on them as well. Now, I take the issue with the homeless very seriously. We all do. But we've got to balance this up fairly across everywhere within Wrexham, with the homeless, refugees, but also our local Indigenous people who we represent, who sit patiently waiting and waiting and waiting. And Councillor David Bethel has touched on, we'll look at reviewing the allocation policy. I was the lead member housing for a long time. I understand it. And I know that David does, and Julie's here with us this morning. But we've got to be careful that we don't forget our local Indigenous people. And that's important, and that's getting the balance right. And if we don't get that right, we'll have problems for obvious reasons. I'm going to move on, Dan. I have allowed you to come back. I'm not going to bring you back again because we're drifting into a scrutiny committee. I think you've had a fair airing this morning. Councillor Mark Jones. Good morning, Mark.
Chair, I just want to say shame on you. Playing people against people. Shame on you.
Okay. Councillor Dana Davis, can I ask you to apologise for that remark, please? And then okay.
I didn't talk about Indigenous people and people coming here as part of the sanctuary programme.
Yeah.
I don't need to apologise, Councillor Pritchard.
No, I think. Can I say, in my capacity as chair, could I ask for this meeting to be adjourned for 20 minutes so I could have a conversation with the legal officer and the group leader of the Labour Party on the comments that she's made here this morning? I think it's a disgrace and it's disgraceful. I'll ask for an adjournment. Thank you. And we'll go back into the agenda. Councillor Mark Jones. Borodar, good morning, Mark.
Good morning. I don't know if anything else is going to be said about that. I think there's only one person that needs to apologise for that. But I want to get back onto the actual report. I'm curious about 3 elements in this brief report. Item 5.6 cites a risk that the site may not be suitable for future development. I would ask, isn't that the sort of thing you check before you start demolishing buildings? Secondly, I'd reiterate what Councillor Diana Davis said. Why the delay? The Exec Board agreed in January 2020 to demolish the old vicarage on the basis that it would free up the site for social housing. With that in mind, I'd expect a feasibility study to have been commissioned then, back in January 2020. To wait 6 months until after the old vicarage had been demolished seems lax, to say the least, especially when we have a growing waiting list. The third item is regarding options 1 and 2. Now, 1 makes sense and is something I'm sure we'd all agree on. Option 2 is to look at all the options. Now, given that the Executive Board has made it very clear that this is to go for social housing, and the lead member for housing has cited that there's £9 million available for social housing, I would ask, why is option 2 now on the table? Why is there a possibility of it being sold off to the highest bidder rather than delivering the genuinely affordable housing that Rhosddu needs? I would make a comment on the consultation. Yes, I did have a phone call from the Chief Officer last week to inform me that this item was coming to the Exec Board, and I'm grateful for that. But that's the only consultation I've had. I'm equally unimpressed that the residents whose homes are included within the Red Line plan have not been consulted. The people who live in Springfield were met with last week, which is fine, but I have had to reassure residents of 1 to 12 Garden Road who are inside the red line that their properties will not be affected by the scope of any future master plan. So I don't think that is ideal consultation. Just finally, Rhosddu community councillors would welcome the opportunity to be consulted on an idea to integrate a new community facility into the master plan going forward. We don't currently have a community centre in Rhosddu, and if the plans are going forward, they should also ensure superior replacement for the Cunliffe Centre, which is part of this current site, and there's nothing in this report to indicate where or what would happen to the facilities available at the Cunliffe Centre. One final point, Councillor Biffles referred to £9 million being available over the next 3 years. Is it possible to put in any sort of context what that will get you, bluntly? Will it provide 30, 40, 50 units, as well as refurbish or remodel Springfield? Or can somebody give me some indication, whether it's an officer or a councillor, about what we can expect for that money?
Councillor David Bethel. David?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll try and answer the questions as they come along. First one was on risk. There's always risk. It is what it is. The reality is, when you do a feasibility study, we expect a proper feasibility study, and if they come back and said there's significant risk on X, Y and Z, then it comes back that there's a risk. So it is what it is with risk. So I'm not sure what the question is really. I think every report that we do as a council, we have to mitigate every risk, and that's why that's in the report. In respect of options, option 1 and 2, I'm comfortable with why there's options, because the reality is there's a map of the back of the site, which includes other buildings, i.e. the Cunliffe Centre and Springfield. And it could be that we have a mix and match, and I said that in the media briefing, that we have a mix and match on site, or we look at long-term futures, but I don't want to speculate at this stage, because that would preempt the commissioning of our study. In terms of consultation, I was aware that the local member was consulted, but at this stage I think that was sufficient consultation, because the reality is we're just undertaking a feasibility study at this stage to commission somebody to do a piece of work for us to have a look how many properties we can get on the site, if any, and that's where we are with that one. As for a new community centre, clearly, you know, if you want to put that forward for future use, then clearly you wouldn't be able to identify any of our funding, because this is HRA specific funding. So you'd have to probably speak to the Chief Officer, which is Julie, on assets on that, to look at the potential of a community building, but it wouldn't be coming from the HRA budget. But what I would say, you mentioned about the delay. To be fair, officers have been working extremely hard to get to this stage. There's a number of assets that we deal with in the council, not just Rhosddu Road site, and we have been dealing with post-pandemic, trying to recover our services as a council. So this is the earliest opportunity that we've had to bring this report to take it forward and make sure that we've got suitable and sufficient funds in place within the HRA budget to deliver a project. You mentioned as well how many units that we could get on site. Again, I'm not going to preempt the commissioning of that study, because he could come back, or he or she could come back and say, well, we can get 60, 40, 30. I don't know. I'm not an external provider in that field. So with all due respect, I think we need to wait that study. And as I said to Councillor Davis, hopefully we'll get that piece of work done by the end of the summer.
Thank you, David. Can I
come back?
Yes, certainly, Mark. I'm just going to ask the Chief Officer, Julie Francis, if she wants to add anything. Julie, anything to add?
No, nothing further to add really, apart from the fact that obviously the feasibility study will look at all elements of the land. So the things that we've discussed today in terms of the Cunliffe Centre, in terms of your request for whatever, you know, the land will incorporate a full feasibility study to look at what can be achieved on it. So in terms of units, etc., we won't know that until we've done the complete work, really.
Thank you, Julie. Self-explanatory. Councillor Mark Jones, you want to come back with a supplementary?
Yeah, I mean, that's useful, because there is no mention of mix and match in this. There is talk about replacing the Cunliffe Centre, but it's not clear whether it's on site or elsewhere. I just want an assurance really, because option 2 is looking at all the other alternative options. So can somebody give me an assurance that this site will not be sold off to the highest bidder, that it will include either 100% council housing or social housing, or social housing plus a Cunliffe Centre replacement? Thank you.
Can I just comment, Mark, with regards to sold off to the highest bidder? There's never been any intention to sell this site. I don't know where you got that from. Again, you know, things are said in meetings and it sets the airs racing. Never had a discussion, conversation. The executive board members, we've always fully supported social housing on this site. I don't know where that has come from. Again, I just want to confirm that we're committed, all of the executive board members and the lead member, to put social housing on this site. You said it many times. Councillor David Bethel.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate again, 3.1 of the recommendations is to commission a feasibility study to explore the future use of the site with consideration for social housing. I think it's quite clear. The reality is, if the suitability of the site come back and said it wasn't suitable for social housing, then that would be surplus to requirements, and we go through the proper due diligence and procedures that Julie's the head of assets, and then we go through corporate land and buildings and the executive board if we get to that stage. But that is not our intention as the executive board or the administration. We're committed to building new council homes on that site.
Thank you, David. Councillor Graham Rogers. Good morning, Graham. Got your hand up.
Morning, Mark. Croeso. It's a question really in relation to the debate that's just been taking place between yourself, Councillor Davis and Councillor Jones. I'm pretty sure it doesn't come under the confines of council land at this particular time. But as regards the feasibility study, and as you've blatantly said and continue to say that the site will be used for social housing, which naturally is of benefit to everybody, especially those on the housing list that, require accommodation. Is there any chance of the old print works? It's been there for donkey's years. It's an eyesore. Is there any chance that this could be included in a feasibility study? Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Graham. I will ask Julie Francis if she wants to come in on that. I do believe it's in private ownership, but it's a long time since I've had a conversation about that building. But Julie?
Yes, currently the print works is in private ownership and is not currently up for sale as far as I'm aware. We've had those conversations previously, but we're prepared to work with anyone that wants to work with us. So I think Councillor Mark Jones and myself have had that conversation regarding the owner. He's got plans for that at the moment, which I think is to make it into accommodation, is my understanding. So it's not up for debate at the present time on the table as far as I'm aware.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Graham, do you want to come back? You're okay with that? It's in private ownership and that's been confirmed by the Chief Officer.
Yeah, I was aware, Mark, that it was in private ownership, but from what Julie has just said, it appears that there's a conversation going on between herself and Mark Jones, so I'll leave it in that ballpark. Thank you, Mark.
Well, thank you, Graham. Executive Board members, I don't see any more hands up at all. Helen, have I missed anybody? No. Okay, thank you. Can I have a show of hands, please? All in support of the recommendations. Okay, thank you. We'll now move back to item